Hey, welcome to the Growth Whisperers Podcast, where everything we talk about relates to building enduring great companies, which also relates a little bit to building enduring great versions of ourselves. Actually, that's probably the major benefit of building a great company, is it forces you to grow and find what you're actually capable of, although you maybe never will find the limit. Anyway, I'm Kevin Lawrence here in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. And I'm here with my co-host partner for the 162nd time, Mr. Brad Giles down in Perth, Australia. Brad, how are things for you today?
G'day, things are great, doing well. Seasons are changing again, as we've said many times. Things are going really well. I feel blessed and lucky and fortunate. In not only in the work that I do, in the family that I've got, but also, being able to have a chat with you every week.
Yeah, it's great. And I'm also grateful the seasons are changing, because we're changing towards summer, which makes a massive difference for us.
Yeah.
Cool. So, word or phrase of the day. What's your word or phrase of the day?
I guess it's comfort. Sometimes we can be in our comfort zone or our comfort spot, and that's a good thing. And other times it's a bad thing. The subtitle to my book, Made to Thrive, was about getting outside of your comfort zone. But it's good to have some comfort. It's good to step out of it. What about yours, Kev?
Actually, I had something different. I'm going to change it. I'm going to riff off of what you said. It's get comfortable being uncomfortable. It's a phrase a mentor of mine said to me years ago. I said, to really thrive in life and career, you need to be comfortable being uncomfortable. Yeah. And that's what growth is about. It's your ability, and it ties back into what we're talking about today. Yeah. So, yes, that was very easy to meld together. It was actually riffed off yours, so it's actually part of the same. So let's get into today. We got a lot to cover, and we want to be as succinct as we can, although still effective. And we're talking about, executive burnout, CEO burnout, human burnout. And how do you know when you need to get help? This is part 1 or 2. Next week, I'll have another episode that we'll record on the resilience part of it. But this is like identifying, hey, you're in a tricky situation. We all the time, we have hard times, and usually our personalities, we push through. And when it going gets tough, we get going. Yeah. And we push through and break through the obstacle of the wall and come out the other side, maybe a little dust on us, but we're fine. And then all of a sudden, that same strategy sometimes doesn't.
Yeah.
And that's where we're talking about today. Often we push through. It's what we do, but sometimes we get broken in the process, and the pushing doesn't work. And, it's kind of like you're speeding on a section of road on the way home every day. Something, of course, I would.
The problem with what you just said.
Yeah. What's that? I thought it was awesome. I think it was great.
The problem with what you just said is it can be perceived as being binary. In other words, we push until it's broken. And what we're trying to encourage here, it's not binary, it's a spectrum, right? So you could be awesome, or you could be as bad as you could imagine, right? But it's not black and white. It's a varying spectrum.
Well said.
And what we're trying to say here is that pick it up before it becomes worse of a problem. So when do you know that it's time to get some help? If someone has told you, I think, Kevin, you need to get some help, it's probably too late, right? And you've done more damage than you need to.
It's true, because what will happen is, as you go down that spectrum, it's like the lights so slowly turn out and fade on your enthusiasm and your energy and your optimism. Yeah. And the spotlight grows on your anxiety and your worry and your dread. But it's not like a light switch. It's just a gradual fade. And if you talk to people that have done it, that's why it sneaks up on them and catches up on them. Yeah. Because it's a gradual change over time. Usually, it might happen in a period of a week or two, but usually it's over a period of time and it catches up with them. Good point.
And you don't know. Maybe you just get a little bit grumpier, or maybe you're a bit short with people. Maybe, the bandwidth to execute projects or decisions slows down. But
yes, or your cognition starts to fade because you're so busy and consumed dealing with whatever is the root of the additional stress in your world that you're like fighting that battle. You don't realize, how the damage it's doing to you, because you just need to continue battling on, because usually you're up against something big.
Yeah.
And you don't realize the change of your state. The people around you might, but you may be unaware.
If we go back 100 years, people went to war and come back traumatized with post-traumatic stress syndrome, disorder, PTSD, and they just suffered in silence, and that was carried over through society and at massive costs. And even if we go back only to the 60s, maybe even the 70s, the phrase that you said earlier was, look, we've just got to push through. We've got to be tough and resilient. We've got to cope. But we're so fortunate today that people, society broadly understand that these are real issues that can affect people, and we've got to work on them.
Yeah, and the thing is that different issues affect different people, just like people that went to war. No, I haven't been to war, but from the studies that I've read, there will be people that are in identical circumstances. And, I think the percentage of people that get PTSD is, last I read, was like under 5% of soldiers, something in that range. But many of those soldiers experienced a lot of stuff, but based on different, whether it's the situations they're in or who they are or their background, their upbringing, people end up with different effects. And so something that might cause you incredible stress and strain, I might just take in stride, because we're all different. We're all unique. And that's the thing with this. And even for some people, something that they experienced once might not throw them mentally, but then another time it might. Again, there's a lot of variables. The key is that we're persistent by nature, which normally works. But sometimes we get into situations where things compound and it gets the best of us. And then mentally and cognitively, we fade to the point where we probably need to get some help to get back to normal again. No different than if we sprained our ankle, we'd probably get help. If we broke our ankle, we would definitely get help. If we broke multiple bones, for sure, we're in the hospital. Yeah. But the same is true mentally. It's just different circumstances lead to different outcomes for us.
Yeah. So why is this a problem, and why is it more of a problem with the audience of the Growth Whisperers, the people who are listening into this? Because don't take this as a compliment, our good audience, but executives are probably more motivated than the average person, right? The average person has a level of motivation that works well. They can have an average job, an average family, an average car, an average house, all of that. But if you're listening to this podcast, it probably means that you're in a demographic, which means that you're more motivated, you're more likely to push and drive and try to achieve more than the average person. And that's the propensity to burn out.
Right, because we put ourselves in situations of potential pain and peril more often. That's it. Because we kind of go off the beaten track or climb a higher mountain or break a new trail with the people that we work with. And so we're more likely to get ourselves into challenging situations. And that's a reality. So we got kind of a few key things that we'll cover off. But, number one is that persistence that we're talking about. Was we normally push hard, and that's why we win. But until sometimes it gets the best of us.
Yeah.
And the main thing that happens is that I have seen dozens and dozens of high-performing executives and CEOs that have been surprised by mental health issues. And even to the point, one that I've worked with for a long time, great, awesome leader, I'll be very generic just to keep it generic. But they had a panic attack once on an airplane. And they were absolutely consciously contemplating getting up, opening the door, and jumping out of the plane. Because being in that little metal tube, their brain was exploding, and they had to the point where a smart, educated, experienced, they did not have a little startup. They had been building an enduring great company.
Yeah.
But they got to that point with, with just a panic attack, which was a result of a lot of other stresses in their world. So all kinds of stuff happens all the time, but people get surprised as it creeps up on them and builds up on them.
They're not expecting it. We are people who are motivated are more likely to crash. We know that. But there's a second part to this, and the second point that we're making today, right, is that every person, not just the people who are putting themselves into this situation where they're more likely to burn out, every person is one or two major life events away from a mental health crisis.
Yes.
This is normal. And so we've got the first part, which is people who are driven are just, to use your race car analogy, they're just redlining more often, right? Their tacho
is at risk pushing more often. Yes.
And then we say all
of us. Yeah, but all of us. Basically, in the metaphor, it's like, you could go and put us in a ring with a professional boxer. You might take one punch to the head.
Yeah.
Unlikely you're going to take two. Yeah. For sure you're not taking three. Then you're on the ground seeing stars. And maybe knocked out, like many people that have mental health crisis have. Yeah. And it's not based on your family. There could be a genetical thing where you could be a little bit more sensitive to certain things. But generally, everyone, the strongest people from the best families, from the best situations with the best resources, still get knocked out by mental health crises. And that's normal. That's part of the game. And, I had a CEO that I worked with, awesome CEO. And like most of the people work with, but very experienced. But they were in the middle of a big transaction for their business. They had a frozen shoulder, so they couldn't sleep properly. And they had a new baby. That's 3 strikes.
Yeah.
The baby is a positive. Selling your business is a positive. But that adds a whole bunch more stress in the environment and a whole bunch more things going on. All of which, in this person's case, affected their sleep.
Yeah.
And they got to the point where their cognition was dramatically decreased. Dramatically. Like, wicked smart CEO, just didn't have the same cognition, because without sleep, less sleep, more stress, you're gonna pay the price.
Yeah.
And again, they ended up doing really, really well in the end, and they, the transaction worked and the business, continued to do well. But the key is that it in the midst of a bunch of great things, they still got dropped on their butt.
And this is serious stuff, right? I mean, we say the title of the episode is about burnout, but unless we address this, unless we know when to get help, it can be a big problem. There was a CEO that I knew many years ago, and he unfortunately lost his business. It was a tragedy. It was in the GFC. And it was a tough time for many, many people. But his business just, Warren Buffett says, when the tide goes out, we know who's not wearing pants. Well, It was a bit like that, without going too deep into the situation. It was a bit like that, right? So the business didn't survive the GFC, and it was really tough. And then he broke up with his wife maybe a year later, which was really tough. And then a year after that, he committed suicide. So it's, it's a terrible tragedy. But these things are, they can have massive ongoing impacts. Not only obviously for the individual, but for his surrounding family as well. So we really,
and that's why I'm so passionate about this topic.
I know you are.
Because in those states, people don't make good choices because they're so cognitively impaired. They see the ending their life sometimes as a solution, which we know on the outside is not the case. That's as good as they can do in that moment.
And that really takes us on to our third point, right? Our brains become a liability when we get into that state. So for that particular person, he's, like anybody who's in a state of depression or whatever it may be, you've got to cognitively appreciate that your brain becomes a liability. The analogy that you put here, Kev, is that it's like you've got a broken leg and you're stranded in the forest. It's not going to help. Your brain in that situation will not help you get out of the forest metaphor.
Yeah. And when that happens, when your brain breaks, you can call it a mental breakdown. We call it the red zone on the mental health continuum, or you're just burnt out, whatever you want to call it. You're just not working with all your functions and you don't feel good, and you are starting to have more unhealthy thoughts. And, people say it feels like the walls are closing in. Other people say it feels like there's a vice on your head tightening up and putting more and more pressure on your brain, like your head's going to explode. I had one CEO that called me that I knew socially. Now, by the time we release this episode, my interview with him could be live on my website, where he's telling his full story. He's just approving the final interview in text now. He's been very brave to share the reality of his story, because he really wants to help people. But he was in the process of going through a major challenge and basically being, forced to sell his business because, of some reasons that it's not my story to tell.
Sure.
And he called me and saying, hey, I need help. We'd met socially. And he calls me to ask for some help with his business. And he was, starting to tell me about it. And as I'm talking to him, I'm like, this guy's got to be in rough shape, and sounds all good and all normal. I'm like, hey, how you doing? And he's like, well, blah blah blah, and he kind of almost sidestepped. I said, are you having any thoughts of hurting yourself or suicide? He's like, yeah. I'm like, all right then. And I reassured him, like, hey, that's it's understandable based on where you're in, but those are telling you that your brain is not your friend right now if you're having those thoughts. And unfortunately, he was surrounded by help. He was in a peer group of CEOs, and he had a community. And I don't want to be,
It's okay.
but he was the type of person who would stand up and always put his best face forward and all that stuff. And so nobody had asked him how he was doing. And long story short, got him going to see a counselor regularly and getting professional help, right? I'm a guide. I am not the answer on these things. They need experts in those situations. And he did a whole bunch of things to get himself back on the right track. And, he's climbing and he's doing very, very well now, but it almost cost him his life. And there was no need for that. But it was such an emotional, entangled mess.
Yeah.
And obviously we're all proud. And when things go sideways and it's messy, we care. It gets to us. And then we start to have a broken brain has very dangerous thoughts. And that's why you need other people to help you out. So in that case, the option is get to a counselor or a psychologist. That's job one. That's it.
Yeah. I like what you said, that your brain is not your friend right now. And that's what we're saying, right? Our brains become a liability. But there are some quick and dirty things. We're going to talk next about the mental health continuum. But one of the things that we can do is exercise. Now, that might seem like, oh, you're not going to get onto that wagon again, are you? But if we're in a meeting, let's say with a team member, and it's quite clear that they're just in a stressed situation.
Yep.
What I've effectively done before is said, let's go for a walking meeting. So we've got a 1 hour meeting, and we'll go for a walk up and around and everywhere else, and we'll talk.
Everything gets better.
It is amazing what a bit of blood flow can do to the brain. Now, this is not necessarily going to solve the person that you just mentioned.
Problem is, it's very logical, Brad. It's very logical. Research backs it up like crazy. But guess what happens to a brain in the red zone? It wants nothing to frickin' do with exercise.
No. But what I'm saying is that if you're working with someone on a team, and sure, your brain might not want to, but
for sure, what you're saying is awesome. I'm just saying, but when the people are in the red zone,
you don't want to do it.
Their brain wants them to do the opposite of that.
Yeah.
Why it becomes even worse. It's one of the best antidotes to it.
Yeah. Yes. It's a quick and dirty. So let's move on then.
Yeah. So the idea of the mental health continuum is just to understand it so you know what happens to your brain when you get messed up.
So let's explain what the mental health continuum is. This is our fourth point. So it's a spectrum from green, yellow, orange, red, and under each of there are 4 lists: a green list, a yellow list, etc. Under each of these lists, there are, I guess, attributes that very quickly help someone to assess where they or a colleague would be sitting. For example, under healthy, you would have normal fluctuations in mood, which is green, whereas under red, which is ill, you would have excessive anxiety, panic attacks, depressed mood, etc. So there are these really quickly these things that you can do to assess the situation. I strongly encourage anyone who's listening to Google the mental health continuum model. There's several you can look at there. It's a great tool. So we've explained that, Kevin.
And it's developed by the mental health associations of the world. And I'll flash it on the screen for those of you that are watching the podcast here right now. And as I talk about it for a minute. And the main thing here is it just shows how your cognition, your energy, your social activity, your substance abuse changes as you go. Because basically, as your cognition starts to get worse, or your mental health starts to get worse, you're likely to seek more things to make you feel better. So if you just take addictive behaviors, which are really coping mechanisms, it goes from whatever your normal range is, whether it's shopping or alcohol or whatever your vice is. Everyone's got something. It starts to just, as you progress across the continuum, it gets to the point where it owns you, and that's where deep addictions get into, and people get into trouble with drugs and alcohol and credit card debt or whatever, is that there's they're trying to counteract the stress, and it just becomes worse and worse and worse. So the idea is you can identify how you're moving, and the root of it is no different than if it was to be measuring the severity of a foot injury. Green is a normal foot. Yellow is a sprained ankle. Orange is a broken ankle, and red is broken ankle requiring major surgery and a metal plate. And if you're green, you're fine. If you're yellow, you got to take a little care of your foot if it's sprained. If you break it, you got to go to a doctor. And if it's a horrible break and you need serious multiple surgeries, of course you're going to go to a doctor. Same with the brain. At orange, we should be getting help. And that's the root of it. And a quick example is during COVID. I ended up in the red zone and I didn't know I'm there. I teach this stuff. It's in my book.
Yeah. And
a long story short, as I'm going to a spa on a windy road in my sports car, and I had a hardcore incident of road rage, literally charging at the car in front of me like a bull would charge someone, and then slamming on my brakes before I hit the bumper and doing it repeatedly, trying to give them the suggestion that they move out of the way so I could enjoy the windy road. And I know that's absolutely absurd behavior. I almost got in a fight with a restaurant manager too, because he wouldn't let me talk to my daughter at a table in a restaurant. She was 15. She couldn't decide dinner. She's crying. And I wasn't allowed to go to her table because of COVID rules. Anyways, I'm not a fighter.
Yeah.
I am a race car driver and I'm a little aggressive. That's true. But I know those are horrible behaviors. But I didn't realize till I was in the middle of those and I had a chance to reflect. Whoa, I'm actually in the red zone. I did, because it was after COVID. Me and my team were working crazy long hours. Even you and I were collaborating on things like Mural to figure out how to run strat planning sessions remotely and blah. It was nuts. It was crazy. And then I had to kind of get some help and get on the right track. And even myself as someone who's well informed on this, I still ended up there with all the right mechanisms because of the circumstance. And my behavior was atrocious, which I peeled back. And that's the thing, is it happens to any of us, and it can pop up out of nowhere.
So the mental health continuum, again, we encourage people to Google that. If you can self-assess, then great. If you need to help assess other people, then that's great as well. The key is that often friends and family, our fifth point, are not enough. They can be supportive, but you can't absolutely.
Can I just change a word?
Yes.
Always, not often.
Friends and family are always not enough. Okay, we cannot get through this stuff.
They can give you the best hugs on the planet.
Yep.
And when things are good, they're the best people to celebrate with.
And there's a couple of reasons. They're often too close to the situation. They're not mental health professionals. And they might not know, or they might, they're too close to the situation. I was making that point again.
Yeah, well, it's like if you broke your ankle, you're not going to let your uncle, who's a welder, or your uncle who is a neuroscientist in a laboratory, operate on your ankle and fix it.
No.
Like, we know. Or your other cousin who's a plumber and just got their ticket, but they're real keen and they're good with a knife and they're a hunter, so they know how to cut the elk meat real well. You're not going to let them do it. So why would let them work with our brain? So one of the CEOs I worked with that was suicidal, and unfortunately there's many that have a number that I've had to have that conversation with. But he said, the problem with my friends and family is they had all the same thoughts that I did.
Yeah.
And it made it worse.
Oh dear.
And they have the best intentions.
Yeah.
But like the cousin with the sharp knife who knows how to cut because he's hunting and cuts up the meat, he's not going to know how to fix and do surgery on the ankle.
And you know the other thing, if we go back to what we said earlier, everyone is one or two major life events away from a mental health episode. Maybe that major life event is affecting the family and friends as well.
Yes. Yeah, they could be off their game. Your cousin, who's the good hunter, who knows how to use a knife, he could be in the red zone too.
Yeah.
And he could be delusional, thinking he could be I'm making up weird circumstances, but you're right. They could be affected. The main thing is they're wonderful support. But in these things, they are not skilled. We are not skilled. I wrote a book that touches on this, and I know that the number one answer: psychologist, counselor, mental health hotline, or emergency.
So that leads us to the next point of algae. Tell us about algae, Kev.
Yeah, algae is from the, again, mental health associations of the world built the mental health continuum. And I know I'm familiar with the one in Canada and others that use it, but they have a model of what you do if there's concern. It's called algae. Assess for risk of suicide or harm. If there is risk, get them to help immediately, i.e., get them to their doctor or emergency, or call a mental health hotline right now, like in the moment. 2, listen non-judgmentally. They need someone to hear them and not tell them about the starving kids in Africa and how they should be happy because they have a roof over their head. Give reassurance and information. The reassurance is, hey, this is normal. Everyone deals with it. There's this thing called the mental health continuum, and you probably just got knocked to the right towards the red zone. Encourage appropriate professional help. Doctor, psychologist, counselor, emergency, or mental health hotline. And then encourage self-help, which is, a resilience. What can you do? Get sleep, get out for a walk, get with your friends. But if they're suicidal, they got to get with a professional. That's number one.
Yeah. Okay, that's good.
And so it's basically a checklist of what to do. It's a guideline for lay people like us to know what to do.
Yeah. Algae, ALGEE, the action plan is what you can search the internet for to get that point again. So we've got 2 points of action for listeners: the mental health continuum, number 1, and number 2, ALGEE, the action plan.
Right.
And obviously,
so the root of it is getting help.
Yeah.
And we do it naturally with physical ailments. We should do it with mental. I've worked with many different counselors along the way, and I have good friends like you, Brad, and other people that I reach out to when things get hard in my world. Like I have a network of people I could reach out to for different things. But a counselor, like the counselor that I work with, I haven't talked to her probably maybe 3-4 months.
Yeah.
But I will book a session again soon and keep that relationship, because it's kind of like my insurance policy of when I need help. And there's always things I could use help with. But when it gets really crazy, those are the people that keep you alive in some cases, or shorten the recovery period, or minimize the pain, or help to reduce the pain. They are critical. I know a lot of people have stigmas about talking to counselors, but we don't know about doctors. So we're okay with getting someone to work on our body, but we're not with it for our mind. And again, I used to have that story, so I can understand where it comes from. I just think it's a shame.
So if you're listening to this before we close, if you're listening to this, the title is, how do you know when you need to get some help? If you are unsure, if you've got no one to turn to, I would strongly encourage you to contact the mental health helpline in your country. I know that certainly Australia's got one called Beyond Blue, and I know that America and Canada and all the first world countries certainly have them. So if you don't know what to do next and you've listened to this, definitely I want you to get on to mental health hotline. That's what they're there for.
Yep. It'll pop up everywhere in the world. They have them. And your other options is go to the emergency room of your local hospital, or go to the doctor or a medical clinic, but get to a medical related expert who can help you. Also, many times companies have employee benefits programs, your EAPs are called, employee assistance programs, that have counseling or mental health available as well, because it's not usually free.
Because
the hotlines are free, the medical system is free. Yeah.
Because as you said, Kev, your brain is not your friend if you're in that state of mind.
Exactly.
Now, having said that, next week we're going to do part 2 of 2, which is building your resilience. Executive burnout, building your resilience. So that's what we're going to talk about next week. So hope you've enjoyed the episode. Quick review. Executives are often more driven than the average person. We push harder and that's why we win, but that's also why we crush. Okay. Everybody is generally, as a statement, 1 or 2 life events away from a mental health crisis. Everyone. Next point, our brains get broken and become liabilities, like broken legs stranded in the forest. Number 4, we need to know that what is the tool that we should use when there's a chance that help is required, and that's the mental health continuum. And then the next point 5 is that friends and family are always not enough. They can be supportive. We spoke about ALGEE, and then get a doctor or psychologist in the same way you would if you had a broken leg. So thanks for listening. This has been the Growth Whisperers. My name is Brad Giles here in Perth, Australia, and my co-host Kevin Lawrence is in Vancouver, Canada. You can find Kevin at lawrenceandco.com. He's got a fantastic newsletter that he puts out every week. And for myself, you can find me at evolutionpartners.com.au, and of course our newsletter as well. You can find us on YouTube if you so desire by searching The Growth Whisperers as well. Hope you've enjoyed the episode today and look forward to episode 2 or part 2 next week. Have a great week.